2.
Okay, and then we need to do the spotlight. All right. We're having an issue. All right. Okay, there we go. All right, done. So, Todd, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. So we met, I don't know, it's been like 10 years maybe. So we connected through an organization called Mankind Project. And in April 2011, I went through their transformational weekend. It was a crack the door open moment for me. And then when you do that, then you got to actually do a bunch of real work to like figure yourself out and get going in the right destination. So Todd and I connected around that organization, and he had mentioned that he was doing a podcast called Zen Parenting. And I think I sort of knew what a podcast was, but I wondered why he was wasting his time doing that. Now we look back and it's like, wow, I wish I'd done that then. And he has also started an organization called Men's Living, which has really taken off. And I'm a part of that group. It's amazing. I mean, we did a weekend retreat. I don't know, we had 40 people there or something. I don't remember the exact number. And then we have a Marco Polo group, which is a place where you can record a little video and other people can see it. So you stay in touch with people every day if you want. And then a really active Discord group, which is incredibly strong right now. Like everybody's in there using it and talking about all kinds of things. And then he's also built a coaching practice. And I'd like to start really with the coaching practice, because this idea of conscious leadership, I think, is where coaching is going. I think it's where everybody is going. And I think it's really important to understand some of the distinctions between how this new methodology really works, which I've gone through with you, and how maybe the traditional ways of doing coaching fall short. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to turn over to you. You want to
Sure,
say whatever you want to say?
Yeah, so thanks. And so happy to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. So I always thought that I was a good friend to people and I was good at listening. If you had asked me 20 years ago, if I knew I was going to be a coach, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't even know what a coach is. And then a friend of mine came and told me that they went to a Tony Robbins workshop. And I'm guessing most of you have at least heard of him. And I decided to do the workshop. It's a 4-day workshop, pretty intense, thousands of people at this huge convention center. And then at the end, he, made a push to the audience about all these different things. One of them was to be a coach. So I signed up for it thinking, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but it seems like it's a good fit. So I think that was like maybe a 9-month commitment, relatively inexpensive, comparatively speaking. And I started coaching, and I decided in my podcast, we talk to parents, and my wife specializes in speaking with women. And I decided I want to specialize in speaking with men, and maybe we'll get a chance to explain why at some point. So I started coaching guys through using the tools that I received at the Tony Robbins thing. And it was good. It was fine. But what I found out was a lot of my clients' issues tended to recycle a bit. Or actually a lot. And in a typical coaching session that I used to do, the guy would come and tell me a problem, whatever it is, like I don't have enough money, or my wife doesn't love me, or I'm a bad parent, or whatever it is. And I would sit there and give advice. I'd be like in this advice giving mode and, hey, have you tried this? Or do you know about that? And they would leave thinking that, okay, I'll try these new tools. But what I found out was there was a lot of recycling going on of the problems. It would it was like whack-a-mole. They would like take care of this problem, but something else would show up. So years later, I came across a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. My wife told me there's this guy named Jim Dethmer who was speaking at this thing. And I just really loved the difference in how they chose to teach coaching. And they do a lot of things. A lot of it's through corporate coaching. I wasn't really interested in that at the time. I was more into individual coaching, but the way that they coach is different in the way that I used to coach, but I now use their model. the way that I used to coach was it would be very content based. Like, here's the issue. Let me know what you think. Tell me what you think I should do, and then we'll move on. But it was very specific on data, on what's happening out there. And what I learned through the 15 commitments was it was called context coaching. So it's not what's happening to you. It's from what energy is it that I am addressing this issue. So in other words, what's underneath it. So I decided that I wanted to take a deep dive into this. And I did what turned out, because it happened during COVID, a 16-month training course about how best to support people in their issues. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And the big difference is that I'm not giving any advice at all. And it's a very body focused coaching. And what I mean by body focus, it's like emotions and body sensations versus very head based. I feel very safe in my head. And I think that my body is trying to teach me all these different things if I could just tune in and listen. So that the way I coach now is create a space for the man to share whatever it is that he's sharing, invite him to tune into his body. Because I think most of us kind of know what to do if we could just get to that place. So it's very emotion driven, especially for guys. I grew up, I say that, I'm just trying to undo all the lies that I was taught growing up of what it means to be a man. And, the man box, like my value is only predicated upon how much money I make or how many women I have sex with or whatever, all these lies that we've been taught. And what I want to do with these guys is really tune into their emotional state and listen to their body and identify, locate the emotion in their body, express it, and seek wisdom from it. And the 5 core emotions as taught through the conscious leadership group is anger, fear, sadness, joy. And the last one, which a lot of people have a hard time understanding, is sexual energy or creative energy. So I'll pause there just to kind of see how that lands with you, Larry, and where you think we should go next.
I think it's just a great overview, and it's been my experience that it's not possible to change anything unless it's a whole body change. And that applies to things like learning how to do marketing, sales, and writing content. And if people are teaching those kinds of things without this kind of a component intersecting with it, I don't think it's very effective. And people aren't able to change how they see themselves in a way where that content becomes really powerful, or their sales approach becomes really powerful, or whatever they're doing. You got to get into that kind of space. So I get it. I've had the same experience. It's transformed my life living in this way now, where I'm seeing all these things as sort of, connecting.
Well, and I'll talk real quick, Larry, about I'll give you, so instead of me just spouting out a bunch of ideas that may or may not land with all of you, I'll give you a real world experience. Right before I decided to do the conscious leadership thing, I was waking up in the middle of the night with these treacherous stomach aches. And it was going on for a week. And my wife is like, you probably want to get this checked out. And I'm like, all right. So I went to all the doctors and I got all these ultrasounds and all that, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. But the only way for me to relieve myself of the pain in the middle of the night would be to get out of bed and walk around for about 30 minutes. So at like 2:30 in the morning, I would have to get up, walk around for 30 minutes, and then come back to bed and go back to sleep. And then after doing all the Western medical stuff, which I hold in high regard, and they couldn't find anything, my wife asked me, because my wife read a book called Zen Parenting. She believes in the chakra system. And the 3rd chakra is your gut, like your intuition, which is really important to us entrepreneurs. And she said, what's out of alignment for you? And it was 2 things. At the time, I was a landlord. So I owned 2 apartment buildings that I could not stand. I hated being a landlord. I wasn't good at it. My tenants ended up hating me, or they loved me because I didn't know how to set up boundaries. And the other part was I wanted to do this coaching thing. And so I told my wife, like, these are the things that I feel like are out of alignment. She's like, great. How can we, how can I, as your wife, support you? I'm like, well, I feel like I need to sell these buildings. So I called a real estate agent I knew. I said, I need to sell these buildings. And then I called my boss, because I'm also a sales rep. And I said, I need to have a conversation with you because I want to do something really radical that doesn't necessarily have to do with the job that you hired me to do. Will you support me? And we sat down for lunch. And the day after I made those two decisions, all my stomach issues went away. Now, you could be that's a coincidence, but the idea that I could have ignored these body symptoms in me and just continued to like put my head down and try to like figure it out some other way. But instead I tuned into my body, and thankfully for the wisdom of my wife, inviting me to look deeper aside just from the stomach pain. It's like, what's underneath it? And I had to do some, I had to do some digging, like what's underneath it. What was underneath it was I was completely not doing what it is that I wanted to do. And when I made that switch, the pain went away. It was kind of incredible. And there's a part of me that if I were listening to that story, I'd be like, bullshit, like no way. And for whatever reason, that's what happened. So anyways.
It's just an amazing story, and it lines up with what Dave and I were talking about. It's a perfect example. So if I'm a solopreneur and I have a symptom, so instead of my stomach hurts, it's, every time I sign a client, I stop working on my business because that client overwhelms me. So, okay, well, what's causing that? So our approach is map out what we're calling a current reality tree, which is basically includes stuff like I own an apartment building, so it's everything in the system. And then you have to identify the cause and effect relationships between all those elements. So you know exactly what one or two pivotal objectives, when accomplished, lead to a cascade of positive outcomes. And what that does is it gets clarity immediately. So this happens really quickly, and then trajectory and traction, because then you know exactly what to do every day. So I totally resonate with what you're saying is a model. And so I want to go in a little different direction. Another thing you're doing, because I think a lot of people here are aware, I need a podcast, I need my own event like this one. So I think everybody needs to have a place. You have to have an event, you have to have a workshop you run, a live on LinkedIn, a Facebook group, a podcast, YouTube channel, whatever it is, but your place where you're the master of the content, and give people an opportunity to get to know you. And the lurkers can see it, and all that stuff too, are going to become your customers. So you guys did this, and I don't know, what are you in like the top 10 now for parenting, which is huge accomplishment. I mean, there's millions of these podcasts now. So I'm curious, like, where is it now, and how did you get there?
Well, it's funny. Like, I think we're in like the 90th percentile of podcasts. And it's just because there's so many of them, and so many of them come and then they go. We were lucky enough, my wife was smart enough to see that this was a platform that was going to only grow. And we started, I think, 11 years ago. And at the time, people didn't even know what a podcast was. So I would have to explain it like it's an audio radio show or something like that. Like nobody had any clue what a podcast was. So I started the way most of us start a business. I told some of my friends about it. And I'm sure on the first month or two, there was 5 or 10 or 12 or 15 people that listen. And then all of a sudden, these people I didn't know started like commenting. I'm like, wow, this is weird. I don't know these people, yet they're listening. So we've been doing that for, I think we just did our 655th podcast. They're about an hour long. My wife and I are very selfish with microphone time. We don't have many interviews. It's basically just she and I talking about, and it's not a parenting podcast, by the way, even though we call it that. That's like the hook to get people in. It's really a self-awareness podcast. It's the ability to see what our kids are here to teach us about ourselves, instead of whether or not you spank your kids or not, or whether or not you should punish your kids or not. It's really whatever happens in the household, what is it that I can learn from this, and how do I investigate my own trigger points? One thing that we say that we stole from an author named Dan Siegel, and I say it at the beginning of every podcast, is that the best predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. So the best predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. So it's really, to be a good parent, it's a self-awareness exercise. And so many of us spend so much of our time asking what we should say to our kids. And what we say to our kids is of minor importance, in my judgment, in my experience. I have 3 daughters, 19 years old, 17 years old, and 14 years old. And I think my 3 kids tune out after about 30 seconds of any lecture that I want to do. Instead, what they do is they look at how I navigate the world. How do I model? Like, if I want my kids to read, I want to make sure they see me reading. If I want my kids to not be on their screen, I got to model that I don't spend much time on my screen. And when I don't do that, to be easy on myself and to not, I'm by far my harshest critic, and I self-blame, that inner voice, that inner critic in my head sometimes runs rampant. So anyways, but yeah, so I think we get about 9 or 10,000 people every week that listen to us. And it's just kind of the sacred place that Cathy and I can have a very conversational, easy to tune in conversation, and a lot of people resonate with it. So I don't know if that helps, Larry, but that's what I got.
Does. And one of the things I'm noticing over this last year and a half of studying all this is there's certain fundamental laws or principles in the universe that repeat over and over again. And I'm identifying them, and then I'm seeing them manifesting in different places that allow you to apply them everywhere, or in specific ways. And one of the principles you just said is this awareness thing. So there's something about this internal awareness of watching yourself do things that is a fundamental principle. So I would say exactly the same quote for the solopreneur world. So the biggest predictor of who's going to be a successful solopreneur, I forget your exact language, is someone who has insight into themselves and insight into their business. So we call it reality-based thinking. And our system is designed to get people into reality-based thinking. So if they recognize, I'm not successful because I'm totally self-absorbed, and I got to shift that. And that's what's causing me the barrier. They do that. If it's, my speaking skills are not quite as good as I thought, and I need that, it's that, or whatever the thing is. But to me, that is the biggest, the biggest mover is you got to get that sort of internal dialogue going, that detached observer watching yourself, accepting the incompleteness of not being at your destination, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, we all have, you can call it self-awareness, you can call it mindfulness, you can call it presence. The definition I like to go with is, what does it mean to be present? I like to say it's being aware of what's going on without judgment, which sounds easy, but we are wired to judge. We are wired to scan our environment for threats out there. And most of us, including me, are usually, the term I use is below the line. And that's just a way to describe, that's when we're judgmental, or we're very critical, or we're very closed, or we're very defensive. And then above the line is when you're open and you're curious and you're willing to learn. And when I first learned that, I'm like, okay, above the line is better than below the line. So I just need to figure out how to get above the line. That's really not it. Where it is being able to locate yourself. So what does that mean for me? To breathe, to find out what's happening. So my oldest daughter just came home from college, and I found myself getting worried, fear-based, reactive, like, okay, this kid's got to find a job. And she's got plans to babysit and do some other things. And I started worrying myself, like, who is this kid if she's not working all summer? Because I went back to 1989 when I came home from my freshman year of college. I had to start working 2 days after. And even that, so instead of me getting judgmental and accusing her of being lazy or complacent, I needed to kind of locate myself, like, wow, what is this about? It's about the fact that my history says that she should be working the Monday after she gets home. I'm worried that I'm going to raise a spoiled kid. It's, who does this kid think she is if she can just sleep in during the summer? So even these things that can get us to react, and that doesn't mean that I don't act or say, okay, I think it's time we negotiate your summer schedule. But from what place is that coming from? Is it coming from a place of closeness, defensiveness, reactivity, or is it from a place of openness, curiosity? And because the reason it's important to be able to locate ourselves above or below the line is because it's really hard to be in relationship with somebody when both people are in this closed, defensive, reactionary place. Usually it only takes one person who has this ability to locate themselves where it doesn't go sideways quick. And that's usually when my wife and I go down a bad hole. It's like when we're both in this place, usually one of us are in a place where we can kind of support one another in their defensiveness, if that makes sense.
It's interesting for me when I first discovered this, and not that I did it, but was on the Mankind Project weekend where you'd work through processes and they'd separate these things in buckets. So you know, and I won't go through all the details for everybody, but one of the processes you would talk about the facts of the situation. They call it the data. So what's the data? And someone would make a judgment, and then the facilitator would say that's a judgment. What was the data? And you sort of train your, and then say, oh, okay. And then what are your judgments about the data?
Yeah, and the
What are
data
your
is
judgments about the other person?
The data is something that a video records. It's so easy for us to think the data is, well, he pissed me off. Like that's not what a video records.
Judgment.
So we start with the data, and then you can talk about the judgments, and then you can share the emotions. Like there's such a, if we can follow these processes in relationship with employees, with contractors, with kids, but nobody teaches this stuff when we're growing up, right? They teach us what the formula is to figure out the area of a triangle, but they won't teach us how to be in relationship with one another. And there's these tools, these wonderful tools that are available that most of us never find out about. And so, yeah.
So let's get some other people up here. So if we can, can just raise your hand. Patricia, you can sort of bring people up in order in the spotlight here. If you have some expertise in this and want to weigh in, or obviously, if you have any questions. So Patricia, if you could do that, just sort of shuffle them up in order of who raised their hand.
I think Sajad wants to
Sajad
speak.
was first. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
That's where I belong. Todd,
You could spotlight him too. That would be great.
Yes.
I got one question with 3 parts. When you said if we get to this place, then we'll know what to do. What does that mean?
I think that we get in our own way. And when I coach guys, like I said, I don't give any advice, rarely ever, because I don't really feel like that's that helpful. What I try to do is get them into this place. So I'm speaking specifically, Sajad, when I'm in a coaching session for an hour, but hopefully by the end of the session, I've given them a place to, first of all, figure out what their issue is. Because a lot of times there's one issue bleeds into the next. So I invite them to put it into one out breath. Like, what is it that we're working on today? Well, what we're working on today is I feel like I'm not very impactful at work. Great. That's the on-ramp. And then we'll go through this process of allowing them to step into what is called the drama triangle. And that's when they get as dramatic and as emotional, and like it's almost an opportunity to make it as big as you can, but they only get to do that for 2 minutes. So victim consciousness, hero consciousness, and villain consciousness. So they get 2 minutes to get it all out, just like be as blamey and as judgmental as possible. And then afterwards, I invite them to feel what's going on inside their body, and then to accept themselves in this place of fear or in this place of anger. And then we go through certain processes. And the last process is, what is it that needs to happen now? What is one small actionable step that you can do to navigate your way through the situation? And sometimes if something comes up and sometimes it doesn't, but the idea is that at the end, like there's hopefully one small actionable step that you can do to feel more productive at work, or to be more loving towards your wife, or whatever it is. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what's coming to me.
It does. And it flows well to the second part of my 1-part question, or 3-part, 1-part question. Have you studied motivational interviewing within psychotherapy? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Like
I don't, but I'm guessing that there's people who have taught me have probably learned from those, but specifically, no.
Great. Last thing here. What about you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes you don't know that you don't even know it?
All right, let me take that in a second, because I want to answer from my head, but instead I'm going to pause and just listen. What is it that I don't know that I don't know? Hit me one more time with it. I want to make sure I get it.
What if you don't know What if it's something you don't know that you don't know, but you don't even know that you don't know it? You don't even know you don't know it.
There's
So you
probably
might think you know it
Is
because you
that
don't
the
know it.
Donald Rumsfeld known unknown or unknown
Yeah,
unknowns?
that's where it comes from, Larry. Yeah.
Um, I don't know what's coming to me right now. I think I know a lot, which I know is probably, it's funny, the older I get, the less I do understand, to quote Don Henley. I know that what I don't know, I think it sounds like what you're talking about is blind spots. I got a bazillion blind spots. The problem is I don't know what they are because they're blind to me. But through work, and what by work I mean curiosity and investigation around all these things that I react to, hopefully through some support, I can start figuring out what those things are. Got a million of them. There's plenty I don't know.
I have a version of this too. So Tony Schmidt's here. So the way that I approach that in myself is to recognize that what I know isn't that important. So it's the Buddhist sort of beginner mind concept. Know that I have those blind spots, and that the definition of a blind spot is I don't know what the answer is. So these things sort of come, and I guess the other accepting completeness, right? So those things will come into consciousness. They're there. They're in your personal unconscious, or maybe even your collective unconscious. If you look at I look at the Jungian frameworks for everything. But if that stuff isn't come up yet, it's because you don't need it yet. So these things come up because we need them. So something's triggering, they're surfacing. So the point is, you got to back off and let these things come out that you don't want to see. Right? The shadow is what we want to hide, repress, and deny. So we want to take the stuff that we buried down there. We want to hide, repress, and deny. And we want to let it out when it tells us to let it out. But there's no point in digging down there to find something that's not ready to come out yet. And those are the unknown unknowns, I think.
Well, and I think it goes, because part of me feels, Larry, when you say that, like, well, I'm just going to hide in the safe place. But I also know that if I'm not ready to go to that dangerous place, that's not healthy either. And I think most things are nuanced in between the black and the white, and that's the gray. And, that's what we do. Like as a coach, you try to nudge your client in a certain direction. You don't kick them in the ass, but you also don't let them off easy. Larry, you and I have kind of worked together, and there's times when, we challenge one another. And if you can challenge one another from a place of, empathy, compassion, and that's something I'm still working on. Sometimes I am Mr. Nice Guy, and I just don't want to upset anybody. And I know that doesn't always serve the person I'm in a relationship with. So
I want to reframe it. So what I was saying was that we want to always be connecting into our personal unconscious energy.
mm-hmm.
What we want is to let the personal unconscious energy release itself based on what is down there that it knows needs to come up,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to worrying about what we don't need to mess around with yet, because it's not helpful, because we just don't need it, because you can't bring it all up. It's the entire history of the human race, to me, is down there inside of us. We can't bring all that stuff up at one time or ever in a lifetime. So it's like the stuff comes up that needs to come up. But I would say strongly, like, if you're not connecting into that stuff all the time, and you don't have a methodology, daily methodology, I do it every single day with my Tai Chi practice in the morning, is let that stuff. And then I work with people like you when I get stuck, or I call Sujat up, or whatever. So, we got to have a way of dealing with this stuff. A group, I got my Wednesday Summit Club group. This is the kind of stuff you can bring these things up and trigger them. But if not, it's going to come out sideways somewhere.
Yeah.
You can't.
And then even when it does come out sideways, like part of me is like, that Tony Robbins, I'm sure it's not his quote, but is this happening to you or for you? And I used to bypass, like, oh, this is happening for me, so I'll skip over my emotion and just say, what lesson can I learn from whatever this experience is? But as a guy who's been taught that the only emotion I'm allowed to emote is anger, then I've found myself bypassing all that stuff. I'd bypass the fear, the sadness, even the anger and the joy. And so my hope is that when these things happen to us, we can investigate it, like curiosity. Be curious, not judgmental. Be curious about everything. When the shit hits the fan, can we get curious while at the same time allowing our emotions to come through it. And I tend to think that women are conditioned a little bit more nicely to express those emotions. And I think us guys get shut down the minute that we walk into a toy store when we're 3 years old. And, you know, but we can go on a different tangent with that. So.
Izzy, what's up?
Yeah, really, I appreciate how you consider the coaching, and how your pathway is really amazing. So I wanted to dig into more into it. So I wanted to ask where you get this knowledge, like more specific one. Yeah, so it's just self-awareness, or it's something, you know, also some other sources which impact you, influence you so much?
So if I can just make sure I understand your question, like, how do I get this knowledge, and where do I get these resources from?
Correct.
Yeah, well, I live with an amazing woman, and we are also business partners, but I'm married to this incredible woman, and we're constantly loving each other and challenging each other. She also happens to be a self-help person that has read a bazillion books. I don't like to read as much as she does, but that's not saying much because she reads a lot. And where I'm at now, Izzy, is I find myself having a little bit more of an aversion to the books, because I feel like I've read enough and I haven't practiced enough. So what I'm trying to do now is integrate some of these things that I'm learning. Because what I do sometimes is I go to the safety of a book, but I don't put it into practice. So, I mean, there's so many wonderful books out there. Larry mentioned Simon Sinek and Tony Robbins and Jim Dethmer and Diane Chapman, Dalai Lama. I mean, there's so many good, just pick one book, and instead of going to the next book, practice whatever's in that book and try it out. And it's really uncomfortable. It's really scary to actually do the work. It's much easier to read a book and tell other people how to live, but it's much scarier to actually do it myself, do that work myself. So I don't know if that helps, but
yeah, definitely. Like I still like, yeah, your self-awareness and how you perceive the world is really amazing. And so last thing, you mentioned that there are some tools, like for it was connected with the relationship, and that we can find them. Can you just mention this book?
Sure. I mean, there's so many out there, but the one that I'll mention to you all right now is the organization that I got my most recent coaching certification from, is the Conscious Leadership Group. What's great about this group is that they open source all their tools and all their resources. They have blogs, they have really powerful videos that I have my clients watch before they get on a session with me. They have worksheets and PDFs, and I'm sure Larry can put that in the chat box, but it's conscious.is. That's the name of the website. But if you go to the right side, there's all these resources. And these are, in most organizations, all of these resources are protected by a paywall, and they don't do that. They're like, if you get value out of it and you feel like giving us money, go ahead. But if there's any life coaches out there, or even people that want to be the best versions of themselves, there's incredible tools on there, and I cannot endorse them highly enough.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Susan, you have your hand up, and then if you could go pretty quickly with your question or your comment, and so we can get to Jeff as well, and then we'll get into breakout rooms.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a juicy conversation. It's one that I've been in for the last 30 some odd years, and it's evolving more and more and out there. I love it. I'm not considered so weird anymore, the way I coach my clients. So I know that how do you get to the you don't know what you don't know, and how are you, how do you deal with that? And what I found for myself, and what I teach my clients, is that look at your results. Look at, what is your life like? What is the experience of your life? What do you have? What don't you have? What do you don't have that you've been going after for umpteen years. And what do you have that drives you crazy? So it's always in the results, which is called your life, and that's the result of the thought process, the emotions, the inspiration to take an action, and the action produces a result, and all the results that you've done thus far equal your life. And if you're not happy and fulfilled with that, then you go back to the source, which is this, which is connected to this, and everything acts out in the gut. So it's all, all connected to this one fabulous machine that we get to, operate in this lifetime. So that was what I was saying. And I so love this conversation, Todd. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And Larry, you're the bomb.
No, thanks, Susan. I appreciate that. So Jeff, I think you had your hand up right next, and then Runa. I don't know if we'll have time, but let's try to if we can.
Sure. This is just a quick kind of off-topic question, but you said you work only with men. I've known other coaches that find it easier to work with the opposite sex, and I actually find myself responding better to coaches of the opposite sex. So I'm just curious as to why you chose to go that route.
Yeah, there's no right answer. I just have always, I'm a straight guy, and I'm married to a wonderful woman, but I've felt that I am better in a place to support men than women. That's not the right way to do it. That I just know that that's the way I need to do it, because I feel like I can better identify with their experience than I can with a woman's experience.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Runa?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to what Todd was talking about, the emphasis he's putting on practice versus reading books. And I see it in 3 steps. In a way, I see the conscious leadership journey as a process, which is in 3 steps. First is to understand principles, understand the content. So we are learning through knowledge and reading books and that kind of stuff. The second phase is the practice. That's exactly what you are doing, Todd. And the third phase, which is where we start to integrate everything within us. So it's the embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I like to see it as a process.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. This is how we do it. I find the idea, I read the book, I test it out on myself, and then I bring it to Dave, and we figure out how to embody it in the paid product. Or this kind of stuff too. So thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was tremendous. So all your info, anybody who's interested in what Todd's doing with Zen Parenting, his coaching practice, or mensliving.org, the links are in the chat. And then the link to my newsletter is in the chat as well. And I put up those 4 slides in the newsletter that went out this morning on LinkedIn. So if you want to see any of that and use it, that link is there. And then this will be up on the YouTube channel. We're still using our old Revenue Climber YouTube channel until we get the new one up. But the link to that is in the chat, and that video will be up probably tomorrow, maybe, or later today. I don't know. All right. Thanks again. So anybody who wants to stick around, what we do for the last half hour, and I don't publicize it because I'm afraid people aren't going to come for 90 minutes. If I make it a 90-minute meeting, is we just do small breakout rooms. Anybody who wants to stay. Anybody who needs to go because you're booked,